Wonderful privilege to be here tonight, to be able to have a nice winter's evening chat. Thought that I would start off tonight. There's so many subjects around about the history of Bathgate, the Bathgate Hills, and I thought I would start off with something that I've done before, and that's a timeline of our history. So a timeline of the Bathgate Hills history, of Bathgate as a town. So what I sometimes call this is Our Town Bathgate, Our Town and Our History. And it is our town, I mean, I know that everybody on the call tonight isn't necessarily from Bathgate, but those of us that grew up here, of course, call ourselves Bathgate Bairns. But I always say anybody that comes to live in Bathgate is also a Bathgate Bairn. They're just an adopted Bathgate Bairn. Just I was born in the house I live in, number 6 Carlisle Terrace. So I guess it's like the Cockney's been born within the Bow Bells. Anyway, I shall start. So I think the first thing that Bathgate was ever really known for, and I would claim this to Bathgate, is Cairnpapel Hill. Now, Cairnpapel Hill, I'm sure we've all visited. It was used by our ancient ancestor 3,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. Just ponder that for a second. 3,000 years before Jesus Christ walked the earth, our ancestors were up at Cairnpapel Hill, and they were having ceremonial feasts there. There were burials there. There were cremations, and it was used. They reckon, geologists have said 3,000 years ago was the first time that it was used. It was excavated in the 1930s. One of the people who was deeply involved in it was our late MP Tam Dalziel. His mother, Mrs. Dalziel, was involved in the excavation, put some monies forward, and they built the dome that we all see now. Of course, that dome wasn't there, but the dome was built to protect the main chamber. So 3,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, approximately 1,500 years before Stonehenge, our ancestors were here, and they were up at Cairnpapel Hill. So it's quite a thing that to think that they were there all that time. So we really move forward in time to a long, long time ago, but really forward in time to the year 1160. What's significant about 1160 is it's the first time that Bathgate is mentioned anywhere. It's the first time of any recorded history of Bathgate as a town. Sometimes people say to me, Bathgate, where does the name Bathgate come from? It sounds very English, Bathgate, it sounds, I think, where does that name come from? Actually, it comes from the Cumbrian language, which many has spoken in this area. If you go way back to 1160, and it actually means wood of the boar. And it was actually called Bathgate. Bathgate. And I remember as a wee boy, my mum used to give me a row because, you would say, Bathgate. We actually, when you said that, you heard some of the older people say, Bathgate, they were actually very close to the real name, Bathgate. So it was anglicised over the years to Bathgate, but it came from the Cumbrian dialect. We were actually part of Cumbria at one point, and that's where it came from. So it's called Wood of the Boar. There's a little bit more of that later on, why it was called Wood of the Boar. It was first settled in 1160 after King Malcolm instructed the sheriff in Lithgow, and his name was Uchtred, Sheriff Uchtred. I bet you'd never heard that word before. And I'm assuming that was his surname, Uchtred. Maybe it was his Christian name. But that is a name that I have never heard neither anywhere else, Sheriff Uchtred. So King Malcolm instructed the sheriff in Lithgow, Sheriff Uchtred, to grant the land in Bathgate to Holyrood Abbey, so the monks of Holyrood Abbey, for agricultural use and the building of a church. And the church that was built, of course, what's left of it, is the old Kirton Church across from Kirton Park on Edinburgh Road. Still there to this day, being preserved to a point, but obviously no roof on it. But that was the church that was built. So that's the first mention of Bathgate anywhere in print is 1160. If you see these boards as you come into the town, you will see that Bathgate since 1160. So that's why that's written there. In 1315, one of the most significant events in Bathgate's history, 1315, King Robert the Bruce gives Bathgate Castle, along with the barony of Bathgate, to Walter, Lord High Steward. He was the 6th Lord High Steward of Scotland, on the occasion of his marriage to Robert the Bruce's only daughter, Margerie. Therefore, we can claim that the Stuart monarchs can trace their lineage back to their origins here in Bathgate. So, of course, we celebrate that every year in great style in our procession, when, of course, local children play the parts of Princess Margerie, of Walter, the Lord High Steward, of Robert the Bruce. It's a wonderful day for Bathgate, but we celebrate that. But it's incredible to think that the Stuart dynasty, their son became Robert II of Scotland. Now, he wasn't born here, he was actually born in Paisley, but he spent a lot of his formative years in Bathgate Castle. Now, Bathgate Castle was built, actually, if you're ever leaving Bathgate by train and you look out the window and you see the 9th hole of Bathgate Golf Club, it's the green, with the flag in it, it's right next to the railway line. That whole area is where Bathgate Castle was. I was fortunate to fly over it in a helicopter a number of years ago. Nowadays, you could put a drone up, but in those days, I flew over it with a helicopter, and it was a Mott and Bailey castle. It's round, very round. You can't see that from the ground. All you can see is a few mounds here and there, but it was round. I reckon it was of wooden construction, but it was not a fortified castle. I think more of it had been a big house rather than a castle. And if you think Wood of the Boar, why did the royal family came to Bathgate for their holidays? Quite remarkable. Why did they come here? They came here, I believe, I don't have this documented evidence, I think they came here to hunt. And I think it was an important place for them to come and hunt. I think it was like a country retreat. And that's why they built it there. Actually, at the top of the hill on the 7th hole of Bathgate Golf Club, this is never really mentioned, but there's actually a round, foundations or something there. And I think that was some sort of watchtower. And one of these days, I keep saying it, and time's running out for me. I keep saying this, but I would love to do one of those geophysical, that you saw in Time Team and some of these archaeological programs, to do a profile and see what it really looked like. That would be wonderful. So interestingly, it was a proper love match right up to that time. That there was always the look for maybe two royal houses coming together, or for a good breeding stock for the royal family. But actually, this one here was a genuine love match, because what happened was, during the Wars of Independence, Robert the Bruce's wife and daughter were held captive. They were held captive just outside Newcastle, and I think it was a sort of house arrest. I don't think for 1 minute they were locked in a dungeon. There's no real great evidence to how they were treated, but it doesn't seem like, I think they were sort of held under house arrest. But when Bruce won at Bannockburn, he sent Walter the Lord High Steward, 6th Lord High Steward, was a very young man at the time, he was only his early 20s. He was sent, because he was one of Bruce's deputies in the Battle of Bannockburn, he was sent to go by the new king, by Bruce, to go and pick up, if you like, to go and bring them back to Scotland. Bruce's wife and Princess Margerie. And apparently, when they met, they actually fell in love. It's a lovely story, It wasn't as if, she was picked to be his wife. So I think Robert the Bruce was delighted about this, as far as all accounts. Princess Margerie was born actually in Dundonald Castle, but she settled there and spent quite a bit of time at the castle. Sad story about Princess Margerie, though. I mean, we never really speak about this. We always celebrate her marriage. But Princess Margerie, at the age of 19, was heavily pregnant with who would become King Robert II of Scotland. And they were through at Paisley. That seems to be one of the places where they spent a lot of their time, the royals in those days. And for some reason, nearly 9 months pregnant, she was out on horseback. And you think, she was the daughter of the king. You think she would have been in a carriage, but she wasn't. She was on horseback. And the horse threw her. And she sustained a head injury, and actually the baby, Robert II, was delivered apparently by what was the version in those days of a caesarean section, and she didn't survive it. There's actually a memorial, and strangely enough, it's next to a dual carriageway now in Paisley, quite close to Paisley Abbey. She was taken to Paisley Abbey, which in those days abbeys doubled as hospitals, and that's where her son, who became King Robert II of Scotland, that's where he was delivered. Very tragic. She died aged 19. There's a poem that I've always meant to get my hands on. It's called Poor Wee Margerie Bruce. She had this very sad life, if you think about it, held, captive. And then just when she got her freedom and fell in love and was going to have a family, she was killed. It's a very, very sad life. We don't speak about that at the procession, but that's the truth of the matter. So that's the royal connection. That's where it started in Bathgate. There's a couple more royal connections, but that's the royal connection there. The next significant event really doesn't happen until 1606. And in 1606, silver is discovered in the shadow of Cairnpapel Hill. And although the venture is short-lived, on the command of King James VI, that's of course Mary Queen of Scots' son, some of the silver is used to make the Scottish crown jewels, which of course are on display next to the Stone of Destiny in Edinburgh Castle. And the silver came from, as we drive past the Knock Hill, and we drive down. We've all done this walk down. I got there regular with the dog. We see on the right-hand side the huge quarry and, of course, the water that sits. And everybody tends to think, and I did too until comparatively recently, they tend to think that's where the silver came from. It didn't. It came from the opposite side of the road. There was a seam there. You can actually see it if you go. You can see where it has been quarried. That's where the silver actually came from. And apparently, although it was they didn't manage to get much of it, it was actually of remarkably high quality. Hence why King James had heard about this and said, "Look, we need this silver." I think he just said, "That's it. A royal order. I'm having it." And it was used to make those crown jewels. Of course, those crown jewels only really went on display. They were hidden away during the Reformation, and they were rediscovered in a vault in Edinburgh Castle by Sir Walter Scott. Sir Walter Scott, had heard tales that that's where they were. And he's got a powerful figure in Scotland, Walter Scott, and he managed to find them, and he said these will never ever not be on display again. And of course, last year when our new king, King Charles III, when he was crowned, they called them the honours of Scotland. They were all on display. The Lord Lion, and I know the Lord Lion of Scotland, Joseph Morrow's his Reverend Joseph Morrow. He was the key player there, and he didn't know about the connection with Bathgate. He says, "I must tell the king that." So I thought, well, okay, that's nice. He didn't know that the silver was mined in Bathgate. So I don't know if the king knew, but he will know now, because Joe assured me that he mentioned it to King Charles. So King Charles knows where it came from. I could go off just a wee, right, a very quick story, and then I'll go back to what I'm here for. I was very fortunate once, here I go name dropping, I was very fortunate once to have dinner with Prince Charles in Holyrood House. It was when I was chairing the UK Coalition Against Poverty, and the head office was in Liverpool, and I was introduced. But of course, the first thing he said to me was, "That's not a Liverpool accent." And I said, "No, sir." I says, "I come from Bathgate." And I was talking about when he came here and he opened the community owned and worked. It was a sort of job creation scheme in the 80s. And then he spoke about Cairnpapel Hill. And I should have mentioned then, really, about the silver from the silver. I never mentioned, I just meant we just spoke about Cairnpapel Hill. But anyway, I've gone off my topic, so I will get back to topic. So that was 1606, a very long time ago. That's when the silver was discovered. Been a few ventures since then to try and see if there's any more silver there, without success. Again, with some of the modern techniques, I wonder if somebody would ever try. You never know that there could still be some silver there. I have no evidence to that, but I just wonder if that could be the case. So it would be interesting to find out. So it takes us to 1675. As I say, I'm going in a kind of chronological order here. And this is the first reference to coal mining in Bathgate. So coal, of course, became somewhat synonymous with the town. You had Easton Pit, you had Riddoch Hill Pit just outside the boundary of the town, and of course Bulbardy Pit. And much of Bathgate, of course, is actually undermined. You had the incident in the late 70s when Hopetoun Street more or less collapsed. If you think nowadays, when you got Hopetoun Street on the left-hand side, you have where the old library is, you have where the old post office is, they're still standing. But on the right, all the houses that were on the right, there was like a collapse, and they had to be demolished. I remember them when I was a kid. Tool's pet shop was there, Mrs. Tate's sewing shop was there, which my mum used to go to. So coal mining was a huge thing for the town. It's one of the reasons that Bathgate, people came to Bathgate. They came, even in those days, they came little bell pits in those days, obviously, and they came and they mined the coal. And as the Industrial Revolution started to come, the coal was needed. So coal was very important to Bathgate. The last coal mine to close in Bathgate was Easton Pit in 1974, but that was the first mention of coal mining. So in 1745, an interesting thing happened in Bathgate, and that was when Charles Edward Stuart, otherwise known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, and his army spent the night in Bathgate en route. Now, there's been a couple of stories. It looks as though he was en route to the Battle of Prestonpans. He may not have been. It could have been 1746, when actually he was going to Glasgow Green, then to Falkirk, then up to Culloden. It's hard to say just exactly, but there is no doubt he spent 3 days here. So why did he come here? You wonder, why did he come to Bathgate? Obviously, Bathgate Castle, long gone. Bathgate Castle, really not much after you know, the time of Princess Margerie just went into ruin. Again, that's why I think it was made of wood. I think it was just left. He came and stayed with the Norvell family. The Norvell family are still sort of their name is preserved in Bathgate with Norvell Lodge in Bog Hall. Some of these people say to me, why is it called Norvell Lodge? Well, the Norvells were landowners. They had a big house at what the area which is known as the Deans, not Deans in Livingston, it was known as the Deans. And the best way to tell you where the Deans are now, so you could locate it now, and my God, does it look very different to what it would have looked then, was if you're coming along the motorway and you're about to come off at the Bathgate turn, the first Bathgate turn, if you're coming from the Livingston, Edinburgh side, so you're heading west. And if you look to your left, there are some warehouses there. There's a DHL warehouse, there's a couple of other ones. And just beyond that, just that little bit further south, is where the Bathgate water rises, the tail end moss, where the bog burn rises. Well, that's where the house was. That's exactly where it was. It sat there. And you think it might be a funny place to have a house, but really it had a water supply 365 days a year. It sat midway between Edinburgh and Glasgow. It had beautiful panoramic views of the Pentland Hills. So that's where the Norvells stayed. So they were Jacobite sympathisers. So Bonnie Prince Charlie spent 3 days with them. And there's a poem written, and I've always tried to get the rest of this poem. There's 2 poems written about his time when he was here. And I remember it when I was a boy, and I remember 2 lines in. God forgive me, I wish I'd got the rest of it. But it was this: Bonnie Charlie's army are camped at the Clinking Stane. Their maesters wi' the Norvells, they're making him at hame. So they were camped up in the Clinking Stane area. So if you were to go up the Bathgate Hills and you were to go up past Linefield Farm, you come to Junction. So if you turned left, you go down to Ballincreef. If you turn right, you will head up towards where Old Bangor, where the General Hospital was. If you went straight on, you'd go up to Knockhill. And just up there was a row of cottage called the Clinking Stane Cottages. They were still standing when I was a boy. They were called that because there was a blacksmith shop there, so it clink, clink, clink. That's why they were called the Clinking Stane Cottages. And that's where Bonnie Prince Charlie's army camped. And they camped there with that wonderful view looking down. So they were able to look down so that the Bonnie Prince himself was in the house there, but they were able to keep an eye on him. So they camped up there. But crucially, the Norvells provided, the army and, of course, the Bonnie Prince himself with provisions, food, and money. Some of Bonnie Prince Charlie's army, I mean, I hesitate to call them mercenaries because they're really mercenaries, but they still had to be paid. They still had the families to keep. They had, they needed money, and they needed money to buy food and money to do everything. So the Norvells gave them money. But of course, the Norvells backed the wrong side, if you like. It's a whole story about why Bonnie Prince Charlie they lost, but they backed the wrong side. And apparently, after the Jacobites were crushed in 1746 at the Battle of Culloden, they had the house taken off them. Apparently, though, when he was here, he being the Bonnie Prince, planted a tree outside. It was an oak tree outside the house. And he also gifted, I don't know where he got them, but he gifted the family curtains. And the curtains now are with the Stuart Society, and the tree, which was still standing when the house was knocked down in the late 19th century, the tree was made into tables. And I remember the late Bill Milne, who was instrumental in setting up the Benny Museum, he told me a couple of these tables still exist. I'd love to see them. Somebody one day is going to tell me they've got one, but they were made from the tree that was planted in 1745 by Bonnie Prince Charlie. And I also wonder, when he was here, did he realise that his lineage actually started here in Batley? Did he realise, the connection with Walter, Lord High Stewart, Robert the Bruce's daughter, Princess Margery? Did he realise that he could trace a bloodline to here? I don't know if he knows. We'll never know that, but I wonder if he did. I could do a whole lecture on Bonnie Prince Charlie. Fascinating character, absolutely fascinating. He ended up being accorded a royal burial. He's buried in the vaults, the catacombs of the Vatican. His brother was Cardinal Henry Stuart, who he helped to keep Charles to the fore. Charles didn't marry till he was 50. He had no children to his wife, but actually he fathered an illegitimate child when he was here to a lady by the name of Clementia Walkinshaw, and she's for Coatbridge. It's one of these little footnotes in history nobody really talks about. And when he did marry and he had no children, he married a Polish princess. When he married, I don't know why he waited to 50. It's one of these great things, but he did. and then had no children. So he actually brought his daughter into the fore, and she looked after him. He died at age 67. She looked after him for the last 17 years of his life, and she bore some children. So there is a bloodline back to Prince Charlie. Of course, when he died, his brother, his younger brother Henry, was actually the king in waiting, if you like, but he was a cardinal. But it's a whole other story. It's a fascinating story, Bonnie Prince Charlie. And of course, as always, history is written with the victors. So they make him out to be a little bit effeminate and a poor leader and many things. And actually, he was fantastic, really. Spoke 4 languages. He had so much talent. And who knows where we would have been had he won? Who knows? That's one of the great ponderings in history. So moving forward to 1783, another event here in Bathgate that kind of changed things. The Glen Mavis Distillery opened. It later produced McNabb's celebrated Glen Mavis Dew whisky before eventual closure in 1910. So 1783, we had a distillery here. You always think of the distilleries, Glenlivet and the peaty whiskies in the islands and all this. We had fantastic whiskey made right here. And McNabb's Pond, basically the collection point for the water that was used to distill the whiskey, is still there to this day. So if you were to head up just now and you were to head to where the old Peters Hill reservoirs, obviously they're still there, but they've been drained for many years, and you were to head, how can I say, I'm trying to think how the easiest way to tell you, if you were to head, I suppose, due west, if you just walked past the reservoirs, kept going, on the left-hand side, there is a pond there. And to this day, still there, still preserved, that's McNabb's Pond. The water was held there, and then it was fed down to the distillery, which was just down the hill. When I was a boy, the Neely family had Glen Mavis House, and the Glen Mavis House, of course, still standing to this day, the big stone-built house, kind of diagonally opposite the entrance to what's now Bobardy Park. Of course, it was at one point looked on the Bobardy Pit. It was owned by the Neely family, and they had a tap in the back garden, and they actually used it for water, for plant water, washing cars or whatever, and that came directly, you turn it on, and that came directly from McNabb's Pond, and we used to drink the water. The water was lovely. Don't know what it did for us, but we used to drink the water. So, yeah, so that was still there in the 1970s. But it's incredible to think that Bathgate had a distillery. One remnant of the distillery that still exists, apart from actual Glen Mavis House, one remnant is that there is a mirror in the Glen Mavis Tavern in Bathgate, otherwise known as Smith's, in Gideon Street, and it advertises the whisky. I've always wanted, I've spoke to whiskey collectors, I said, has anybody ever still have it? Bearing in mind it closed the year World War I started, does anybody still have a bottle of it? But no one has ever came forward with it. So it's called McNabb's Highland Dew, even although it was made here in Bathgate. So, and actually, if you think back to, I'm treating everybody that is old as me, probably some people watch would be, but if you remember People's Garage that used to sit on the site just beyond Glen Mavis House, it's now the Glen and Mavis Bank houses, they're all there. Part of that was actually the whiskey bonding stores, and up from it, there was a little building that was part of the distillery as well. And my late father used to go there was a boxing club in it. My late father used to go in there in the 50s, and he used to box in there. So the building stood. I remember it when I was a boy. It was a bit derelict by then, but it was still there to then. So Bathgate had whiskey. It's incredible to think. I doubt I'll ever have it again. So in 1811, maybe the most famous person ever to be born in Bathgate was born. And that man, of course, was Sir James Young Simpson, the discoverer of the anaesthetic properties of chloroform and obstetrician to Queen Victoria. So his father was a baker. He was born in Main Street in Bathgate, which is now it's funny to call it Main Street, this little narrow street, but it's just up from where the present day Green Tree pub is. He was born there. Interestingly, quite a few years apart, him and John Newland, of course we don't speak too much about John Newland these days, but him and John Newland where their houses where they were born were almost next door to each other, but there was a bit a gap in time between that. So he was James Simpson. He wasn't James Young Simpson. People think it was a sort of hyphenated name. He was called Young Simpson because he went to university when he was 14. He was such a talented student. He was sponsored to go to university at the age of only 14, and they called him Young Simpson. And somehow or other, that's got woven into his name. He's became James Young Simpson, even though he was just called James Simpson. And he, of course, rose through the medical ranks and did many things. But of course, the thing he's really famous for is chloroform. I'm sure many watching tonight, you'll have had some sort of surgery, or a family member's had some sort of surgery. And what do we still have to this day? Chloroform. Now, he didn't discover chloroform, as many people say. He discovered the anaesthetic properties. There's a gentleman that's often forgotten in this book by the name of Dr. David Waldie, and he was a Linlithgow man, just by coincidence, and it was him who came up with the formula for chloroform. He's commemorated on a plaque that most people would walk past when you're in Linlithgow, because it's very high up. It sits above the main door in the Four Mary's pub, and he's commemorated there. He did very well in life. He ended up living in India, but he was the man that discovered the chloroform, and he gave it to Sir James Young Simpson, or James Simpson as he was then, and he then discovered what you could do with it. Now, there's always the story, I think many people will know, that he experimented on his friends. It's quite incredible. There was a dinner party, and then he said, right, I want you to try this. This was in his house in Queen Street in Edinburgh, and there's a plaque outside the house there that tells you where he was, where he lived. He said, I want you to try this, and this is going to change the world of medicine. And they all took it, and they all got knocked out, and they all came to maybe about an hour later. Quite incredible that they had that trust in him. But what sometimes missed out the story was he actually tried it on pigs first here in Bathgate. There's some documentation about him coming back here on a few occasions. He had quite a few family members here. And my understanding is he had a brother who lived in the house, and I've just forgot, I should have written this down, the house. If you go along Margerie Street in Bathgate, if any of you know where the old community centre was, or where the wee public school was, that was knocked down when I was a boy. It's on Margerie Street, and I've just forgotten the name of the house, and I'll need to write this down if I do this again. One of his relatives owned the house, and of course at that time it was a big house. It's obviously still there to this day. There was a lot of ground at the back, and they kept pigs. And apparently the respiratory system of a pig is very close to the respiratory system of a human being. And Sir James Young Simpson got a hold of the pigs and gave them this chloroform. Of course, the pigs all passed out, and about an hour later, or however long it was, they all came to. And he thought, well, if a pig can do it, a human being can do it. So then he experimented famously on his dinner guests, on his friends. Can you imagine being invited for dinner and, coming to my house, and I say, right, now that you're here, I have something I want to try on you. I'm going to knock you out for an hour. Aye, no problem, Harry, that's fine. Aye, where do we take it? Yeah, that's it there. Isn't it incredible? But that changed medicine forever. And what I think it really, how Sir James Young Simpson gained maybe fame beyond that, was the fact that he was appointed, while she was in Scotland, obstetrician to Queen Victoria. And I don't know which, I think it was Prince Leopold, quote me on that, I may be wrong, but I think it was Prince Leopold. She delivered, he was delivered by caesarean section, and she was under anaesthetic that was given by Sir James Young Simpson as her obstetrician. That's my understanding for what I've read about it. But he was knighted really not because of he deserved to be knighted, discovering chloroform, changed the world of medicine forever. But he was actually knighted for his work with Queen Victoria. So he may have been knighted anyway, for what he'd done. But that's what it was. But he's Bathgate's most famous son. And I was fortunate, I was through, I'm slightly off topic here, I was through on Hogmanay at the celebrations in Edinburgh in Princess Street Gardens. And of course, if you go in the west gate of Princess Street Gardens, so if you're walking into Princess Street, the very first gate that you go down into the gardens and you see the beautiful Ross fountain, it's kind of just diagonally down from you. The first statue you see as you go into the gardens is Sir James Young Simpson. Stunning big statue. I've taken a picture of it, with the castle in the background. That's where his statue is. So he'll never be forgotten. And he is Bathgate's most famous son. There's no doubt in that. So that's Sir James Young Simpson, born in 1811. In 1824, a very historic thing happened. That's when Bathgate became a borough and it elected a town council. The first provost was Alexander Marjoribanks. He was known as the Good Old Laird. And Alexander Marjoribanks ended up living in the big house, the big Bulbardy house, that was roughly where the sports centre in Bulbardy Park is now. And that's where the big house was. That's where he lived. It was a Robert Adam designed house, and he was in there. Now, obviously, his family had acquired some of the land that the Norvilles had back in the day when Bonnie Prince Charlie was here. But he was apparently very benevolent, interesting man. I mean, you could write a fascinating biography about him. He didn't marry till he was 40, and he went on with the same wife to have 19 children. and he didn't marry till he was 40. And she was a bit younger than him, but they had 19 children. 11 of them lived to adulthood. So he will have relatives going around just now. There's no doubt about that. He also did quite a bit of traveling, and he went to the United States of America. And he wrote a journal about it, which I've always wanted to see. I've spoke to a couple of people who've seen it. I'd always love to see that. But he was known as the Good Old Laird. And every year at our procession that I was mentioning, of course, we always see the banner in the front, and the person that's on that banner is Alexander Margerie, the first provost of Bathgate. So one of the things that he did, he realised that as the town was growing, we didn't have a proper water supply for the town, and it was crucial obviously for drinking water, but for sanitation. And he was instrumental in building the Peters Hill reservoirs. From there, it was a gravity feed down to the town. And the McLagan Fountain, which is actually being refurbished as we speak, that sits now at the Steel Yard, used to sit at the top of what is the pre-St. George Street and on Hopton Street, and it was a gravity feed down there. It was quite an ornate fountain, but it was a gravity feed down there, so horses could get a drink there, dogs could get a drink there. But crucially, you could go there and pull water, draw water, pails of water, that could be drinking water or water for sanitation. This was before, obviously, houses were plumbed in. The McLagan Fountain, just touched on that, that was gifted to the people of Bathgate by Peter McLagan, who was our Member of Parliament in the late 19th century, a Liberal Member of Parliament. And what was unique about Peter McLagan, second longest serving Member of Parliament for this area, second to Tam Dalyell. I think that he had a tenure of 36 years as a Member of Parliament. He was the first mixed race Member of Parliament in the British Parliament. His father had been a landowner. He owned lands over at Pomferson. He owned farms, and pretty wealthy. But he also had spent time over in some of the Jamaica, I believe, some of the Caribbean islands as well. Now, I'm assuming he had lands there, he was working there. I don't know exactly what was there. There's no hint that he had any slaves or anything like that, but he was working over there, and he married a woman, and their son was Peter McLagan, who became the first mixed race MP. And it was his wife, Peter McLagan's wife, who gave the McLagan Fountain. She herself, she was a widow, had 2 children. Peter McLagan never had any children of his own, but he married this relatively late in life, in his mid-late 40s, married a lady who had 2, she was a widow with 2 children. So that fountain was there. But I think it's something we don't celebrate often enough in the town, or indeed in wider West Lothian, that we had the first mixed race MP. So it just shows you people here, those that were eligible to vote, and very often, of course, women didn't vote in those days, and people like me would never have voted in those days. You needed to be somebody. They still felt that despite his ethnicity, they voted for him. So that was when Bathgate became a borough for the first time. So 1833, another momentous time in Bathgate. It was when Bathgate Academy opened, Bathgate Academy, of course, in Margerie Street, as the result of a legacy gifted to the town of Bathgate by John Newand, a native of Bathgate, who made his fortune in the plantations of Jamaica. Born John Newland in the middle, at the same time as Burns, born in 17, I'm just trying to think the date now, 1730 something, I need to write this down. He was born early part of the 18th century, and he was born on Main Street in Bathgate. There'd be so much research done about him, but we've tried to find as much as we can. I had the privilege of delivering the oration a few years back, and I tried to do as much research. It appears like he trained as a carpenter, a joiner, and he went to Chatham, that's definitely, he worked in Chatham. Chatham there, they were building a lot of ships there, and he worked there building the ships. And it seems at some point, maybe he'd accrued enough money, or maybe there was a job opportunity. He went to Jamaica. He'd accrued enough money in Jamaica that he bought some land. The land did well, and that's where, of course, the thing that people don't want to speak about, but it's part of history, so we have to mention it. That's where he had slaves. He was never a slave trader, but he owned land, so subsequently he owned slaves. He actually married one of his slaves, so that's documented. But he made a lot of money. And really interestingly about Newland, I only found this out. The late Ian Hossick was one person to tell me this, but I did some research on my own. He actually owned at one point Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. And you think a few years back when the prisoners were held there, the US, I don't know why, but the United States still own that. I don't quite know why. I guess when Batista was overthrown by Castro, somehow or other Castro allowed the Americans to keep that. It's one of these things that I've never quite got to the bottom of. But I can tell you that John Newland owned Guantanamo Bay. It's quite remarkable. A man for Bathgate owned that. So, but when he died, his legacy, one of the things he wanted to do for his hometown, he'd spent about the first 16, 17 years of his life here in Bathgate. And of course, there were no schools in those days. He wanted the children of Bathgate to benefit from the money that he made. So he left money for a school to be built. There was much wrangling about his will. It went for many years. Some of his family members wanted it. He had cousins. There's so many people. But eventually, monies were released, and Bathgate Academy was built. And it was built in 1833. And I went there. I went to Bathgate Academy, and it's a stunning old building, absolutely stunning old building. And there were certain things that was probably still the same since 1833 when I went. And I remember one of them, I won't be discussing here, I promise you, was the outside toilets. And geez, I remember them, and you know, they would freeze in winter, and you may imagine what they smelled like in summer. It was not pleasant, and they were still there. And I used to say, of course, we were boys, you know. I used to say, "Have John Newland come up and say, you not got any new toilet shit, boys, you know." But anyway, I digress. But yeah, so it was there. So Bathgate Academy, of course, closed in the late 1980s. It had turned into a primary school long before that, and eventually, of course, it became part of the college, and then it was sold off, and thankfully it's still there, as we all know. It made into flats now. A friend of mine lives in it, and I'd still loved it to have been an educational facility. In fact, at the time I advocated it would have been a wonderful registry office in Bathgate. If you think of it, Bathgate's now Jim Walker Partnership Centre. I believe that should have been the Jim Walker Partnership Centre. It should have been done. We had a beautiful hall within it. You know, there was rooms that you could have meetings. There was wonderful parking at the front, place you could have weddings. It would have been stunning. That's what I really wanted. I wasn't a councillor at the time. It was long before my time of doing that, but I really wanted that. At least it still stands. We can still do it. And of course, every year, the good people who have houses within it leave the playground, or what was the playground, it's now a car park, free, so that we can leave for our procession, can leave from there. And my great friend Ruby Beattie, who's instrumental in the procession these days, she and everybody else in the procession committee are glad that those that are in the houses there still allow that. So we still have that tradition. 1849, another momentous time in Bathgate. The Bathgate to Edinburgh Railways opened. 1840, incredible how long ago that was. So that connected Bathgate to Edinburgh. And soon afterwards, 6 years later, we got the connection to Glasgow. But then, of course, when Beeching came along, he said, we don't need railways, everyone's going to have a car, 1962, and it closed. Thankfully, of course, reopened much to the efforts of our late Member of Parliament, Tam Dael, reopened to Edinburgh in 1986. I ran in the half marathon that was to commemorate it, and then in 2011 reopened to Glasgow. So Bathgate was once connected, connection was taken away, and now it's back. And I often say to people now, the thing is, everybody used to come to Bathgate to work. Now people leave Bathgate to work. It's not quite so good, but at least we have that facility. 1857, the Corn Exchange is open. Corn Exchange later became the Pally. Many great people went to the Pally, and the Pally, I owe my existence to the Pally because my dad was a dance teacher in there, and he met my mum in there. 1960. So, yeah, if it wasn't for the Pally, you wouldn't have been burdened with me telling you stories of history tonight. And I think there are so many others in the county who will say that because of the Pally, that's where their parents met, or indeed maybe they met their future husband or wife, people who are watching tonight. I'm just saying to Rosalind earlier on, without one name drop, I played golf with Sean Connery once, and he told me he used to go quite regularly, come through from Edinburgh on the train to go to the Pally. So our future James Bond used to go there. That's how eminent. And the Pally, when it was the Corn Exchange, great speakers in there. David Lloyd George was in there, and one we probably shouldn't talk about, but Lord Haw Haw spoke there. William Joyce, who of course Germany calling. He spoke there in the 1930s, long before he was actually embroiled in the Nazi cause. And there's posters that exist. Bathgate Golf Club formed 1892. Unique distinction in the world of golf in that we produced two Ryder Cup captains, Bernard Gallagher, Eric Brown, and another Ryder Cup player, Stephen Gallagher, Bernard's nephew. Incredible that a little golf club like that has produced that. All the clubs in America have never done that. Think of the size of the United States of America. We've done that. Some great golfers come out of Bathgate Golf Club. I've played golf at Bathgate Golf Club, but I'm not one of the great golfers, sadly. 1899, Renton and Fisher's steel foundry opened, followed closely in 1903 by Mingus's foundry. So two big employers in the town. They made a lot of castings, made a lot of wartime munitions, and indeed it was the only time that Bathgate was ever struck with a bomb, and that was in World War II when they tried to bomb the Mingus's steel foundry, and it landed in Paulville. Thankfully, the bomb didn't go off. It didn't hit any vehicles, didn't hit any people. It landed in a boggy area, kind of where the doctor's surgery is now. So it was bombed. 1903, George Harvey Ward was born in Bathgate, an unsung hero. He was Churchill's private secretary during World War II. The whole of World War II, he was his private secretary. But, you know, party to everything that was happening during World War II with Churchill. He was born in Bathgate, George Harvey Ward. He wrote a book, very meritorious of a whole talk, but that was George Harvey Ward. 1921, a little aside, champion trotting horse Torchfire was buried in the grounds of the Keene Park Hotel. This horse had sired a Kentucky Derby winner. It was an incredible, success this horse had. It'd gone to America and it'd been so successful they brought it back. It retired in Bathgate. It's buried in the grounds of Keene Park. And anybody wants to know where, I can show you where its grave is. It's actually sunk a bit. But this amazing horse. So Torchfire the horse. 1938, the Regal Picture House opened in Bathgate. The first film was The Adventures of Robin Hood, starring Olivia de Havilland and Errol Flynn. My late mother was at that. 70 years later, we had an anniversary showing of it. Thank God that the Regal Theatre still stands, beautiful Art Deco building. And I wrote to Olivia de Havilland, I wanted her to come back here. Well, she'd have been here. I wanted her to come here, age 100. I got a lovely letter back. She was living in Paris, aged 100. And she said that loved it. It was a publicist said that Mr. Havilland sadly doesn't travel, but she's delighted to hear that your cinema's still there and that people remember her in the film. And because I'd said about my mother, and she hopes that you have a wonderful evening. So it was just a nice thing. It'd been wonderful if she came. Sadly, she's no longer with us, but she lived to be 102. So I don't think Olivia de Havilland can complain. 1955, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh came. They were in Kipton Park with Armadale. They were all round the county. My late mother was there. The Provost introduced her. So Her Majesty the Queen came to Bathgate. She came back in 68. I saw her, but I was just a wee boy, and I would be lying to say I remember it, but my mum took me down to see her when she came to open B Block in British Leyland. 1962, British Leyland opened, known as the BMC, British Motor Company. Its height actually had 4,000 people working in it. It's quite amazing where Wester Inch is now, 4,000 people. Various reasons it closed. It was only open for 25 years. I wrote the book. It's called Bathgate Once More. I'm trying to do a new print run of it because I want to update it, and it tells the story. And it tells the story through people's anecdotes of what happened more than me wittering on about it. But yeah, 25 years it was open. My late father worked in there after he came back for the army. In 1986 was when Lizzie the Lizard was found, and I know that the Bathgate Hills Venture, they all went through to see in the lizard in the fossilized. Well, it's not a lizard. Somebody told me it was an amphibian. Get it right. It's an amphibian, not a lizard. And it's quite incredible that they reckon that it was 338 million years ago. Of course, Bathgate at that point, we were Gondwana land, you know, when we're just one big landmass. They reckon what's now Bathgate Hills, Bathgate was actually on the equator. I find that hard to take in, but with continental drift, we drifted north. I wish we stayed in the equator. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we're all lying in the sun in Bathgate? So that was the oldest lizard, the fossilized lizard, found by Sandwood. So famous Bathgate Bairns. Last thing, I think really, you know, I've spoken about John Newland, I've spoken about Sir James Young Simpson, Eric Brown, Bernard Gallagher, Elliot Bunny, Olympic silver medalist, one of my contemporaries, a couple of years younger than me at school, the only guy that ever beat me in 100 metres, and I used to always say that, hey, the only guy that ever beat me in 100 metres won an Olympic silver medal. I think it was more about a poor standard rather than how I was good, because he absolutely left me standing. But Elliot Bunny, sometimes forgotten about. David Tennant, well-known actor. David MacDonald, of course, his real name, whose dad was the minister, Sandy MacDonald, much missed, was a minister at St David's. David spent the first 5 years of his life here in Bathgate. I was at school with his older brother. So he is a Bathgate Bairn. He is a Bathgate Bairn, and he has alluded to that sometimes on chat shows. Paul Di Resta, the racing driver, he's also from Bathgate, Formula One driver. His dad, Louis Di Resta, owns the Twig. So I could go on, folks, but I think I've given you a little flavour of some of the highlights of Bathgate. You know, a kind of top 50 highlights. So thank you. Thanks for your attention.